Hi everyone, this is Alex. Having talked about the Othello rules and some history to the game in the previous episode, today I'd like to talk about more on the board orientation and also some special squares on the board and how that knowledge will help you in your game. So over here I have a homemade Othello board. It was basically designed for public teaching and it was mounted on a whiteboard. So I hope you enjoy this episode today. Everyone, today we're going to be talking about basic Othello notations. Before we actually dive into strategies, it's important to actually understand the dimensions of the board and also the notations of the board. Let us jump right into the topics that we're going to cover for today. So today's topics are board coordinates, special squares, and stable discs. So yes, that's me at the World Othello Championship 2019 in Tokyo, Japan. It just happened last year, and probably nobody expected COVID-19 to happen. So I hope everyone is doing fine in this time and place. Even though it's a challenging time for everyone, I hope that everyone take care and enjoy playing Othello. So let's go into the board coordinates. So basically the rows are numbered 1 through 8. Columns are labeled A through H. The letters always come before numbers when referring to coordinates on the board. For example, the coordinates occupied by the white discs on the board are called D4 and E5. And of course, the coordinates occupied by the black discs on the board are called D5 and E4. I believe this is quite straightforward and clear, so let's just jump straight into special squares. So this is special squares. I know now the board looks very complicated and it seems fairly intimidating, but let's go through it one by one based on the list on the right. The yellow stars that you can see are basically the corners. The coordinates are A1, A8, H1, and H8. So the corners are definitely important when playing Othello because they are stable. And the moment you capture it, there's no way that it can be flipped. And then comes X squares. X squares are basically the squares that are diagonally across all corners. So X that is marked in red refers to danger in general. So the reason why it's generally dangerous is because having your disc placed on an X square gives your opponent a chance to actually access the corner. Since corners are good, you probably wouldn't want to surrender corners to your opponent early in the game. Now, C squares are adjacent to corners, which equally run the risk of giving access to the corner. However, generally there are types of edges that actually allow players to capture C squares without the danger of actually losing the corners. So they are marked in black because they are relatively less dangerous. Now, working along the border, A squares are the squares that are adjacent to C squares. And B squares are the squares adjacent to A squares. Usually people refer to the alphabetical order in ABC, but for notation's sake, it's actually labeled as BAC. If anyone watching this video knows why A and B squares are labeled this way, feel free to leave a comment below. Now the blue box, or center 16, basically refers to the center 16 squares of the board. So the center 16 is usually quite important in the early stage of a game and the early parts of the mid game. Now the I and IB I would refer to as inner A and inner B squares. These squares are generally not very critical in the game, but it does play an important part when a player is playing the mid game. Finally, BC. BC refers to box corners, which are basically the corners of the center 16. So these squares are also important to note more towards the end game in terms of whether they your color or your opponent's color, because they provide access to important squares on the board towards the end of the game. Now let's talk about stable discs. Stable discs are defined as discs that cannot be flipped once captured. So based on the rules of the game, each legal move that you play must be placed on a square such that it sandwiches one of your opponent's discs. So, for example, if you were playing white, you wouldn't be able to actually go around. Referring to the first picture, if you were playing white, for example, it would be virtually impossible for you to capture the A1 or the A8 or the H1 or H8 black discs. That's because they are positioned on the corners. And there is no way you can sandwich corner discs without having to go around the board. However, since they are the corners, there is no way to go around the corner. Similarly, discs that are directly connected to corners are also stable. Referring to the second picture, there are three discs that are horizontally and vertically adjacent to the corner of H8. So these discs are also stable. If you look carefully on the board, there is no way that you can actually capture these discs anymore. So similarly, discs that are diagonally layered from corners are also stable. If you look at the third picture, you can see that discs that are built diagonally layered from a corner are also stable. There is simply no way to go around it once that is established. So even though this is just a very basic concept to begin with, it will play a very important part when you are trying to win games cleanly or when you are trying to secure as many stable disks as possible. Since the rule of the game is all about securing at least 33 disks on the board just to ensure you win, this concept may be basic, but is also very fundamental. And if you like my videos, feel free to hit the like button below and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much.